Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Jessie Ransom, and I'm the Teaching and Learning Product Specialist for Libris. I work with Leganto. Today, we're going to be looking at actionable analytics. So if you're wondering what I mean by that, here's kind of an idea of what we're going to be covering in today's session. I will do an overview of Leganto Analytics, but I don't want to spend very much time on this. We have other sessions that talk more about how to work with analytics in general and how to work with Leganto Analytics. What I want to focus on is really what's below that, how you can use the data that's available to you with Leganto to meet some maybe more strategic goals or, actually be able to take action on that information that you have. I will go through some sample reports. I'll point you to some resources which are already available with sample reports. We'll be looking at these different topics: library workflows, adoption and engagement or usage, support for teaching and learning, and then working with or support for strategic priorities. So for each of these, I'll kind of talk about how you might think about your Leganto data or the data that you have with Leganto as aligning with these sort of higher level needs that you may have within your library for reporting purposes. We will save time for questions, as Ray said, so please feel free to put those questions in the chat. You don't have to wait until the end to put your question in. I recommend that you put it in as soon as you think of it. Those of you who know me know that I tend to talk quite a bit and quite a lot, so I'll also, I don't know, maybe try to slow down a little bit so you have a chance to actually type your questions. No promises there, but we will definitely have time for questions. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start actually with this overview. And as I said, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I'll point you to some places where you can see more information. There's a lot of data that's available to you when you start to use Leganto, and the more you use Leganto and the longer you use Leganto, obviously the more data you have about what's happening with these reading lists and the usage and the instructors and all of that. The next couple of slides here actually come from another presentation, which I have linked to. You can find it on the Knowledge Center, which is more about the data itself, what kind of information you can get out of Leganto Analytics, what you can find, with the three main subject areas for Leganto Analytics, the type of information that you can find in those three subject areas. So the main ones are course reserves, which includes all the information about courses, reading lists, and citations. Again, I'm going to move through these slides quickly, so I'm actually not going to talk about anything else you see on the slide. We will share these slides with you after the presentation, so you'll have access to them. You'll be able to go back if you are interested in more about this that I'm skipping over quickly. The next subject area to talk about is the Leganto student usage subject area, which includes information about how students use the reading list, the citations, the information that's linked to the courses. When you're interested in student activity specifically, this is the right subject area to use. And then the last one is the instructor usage subject area, which has information about how instructors are using Leganto. Which instructors are using Leganto, as well as the actions that they're taking in the Leganto interface. So when you're interested in instructor usage or instructor behavior, this is the place to go. The documentation for analytics is actually in the ALMA documentation. So this is where you can see all the details about these three main subject areas. I'll say there's also data in some of the other subject areas that's relevant to Leganto. For example, the link resolver subject area has some of your Leganto usage information because you're still using the link resolver, or students are using the link resolver to access these resources. If you work with purchase requests, that subject area may be relevant for Leganto. So there are others, but these are the main ones to be aware of. And again, we have more information about all of this. So the first video here is the full presentation, where I just gave you those 3 slides from it. This is the full presentation. So if you are interested in learning more about the data itself, what data is available when you start to use Leganto and how to work with those different subject areas, what they contain. That's what this first Leganto Analytics video is. It's about an hour-long session that goes through all of that. And then we also have Alma Analytics training. So it's the same, using analytics uses the same processes and skills, I guess, or knowledge as Alma Analytics. So if you're really not familiar with analytics at all, or you've never used it with Alma, then this is a good place to start, is just learning more about kind of how it's laid out, how to work with reports, how to build reports, what you can do with them, that type of thing. So those are some resources that you'll have available, but again, that's really not the focus of the presentation today. So instead, what we'll be talking about, oh, nope, we're not there yet. Instead, what we'll be talking about is how to actually work with this. So once you know what data you have, what can you do with it? What should you do with it? That's really what we want to focus on today. And we do have actually many reports that are already available to you. A lot of the reports are actually saved in the community zone. There are some really nice resources that are already available to you. Because they're in the community zone for analytics, be very careful if you are going to use these reports that if you need to adapt them, that you save a copy to your personal or your institutional folder. I've gone in, I was looking at some of these reports yesterday, and I made a few fixes to some of the filters that had been applied, for example. So just make sure that the ones that are in the community folder are really relevant for everybody, and we can keep it that way by when you do need to customize. I'm thinking of things like if you're filtering to a specific department within your institution, that's obviously not going to be relevant to everybody. So you can certainly do that. You can use the community reports and then just customize them as you need to. The main areas to be aware of, first of all, there is the Leganto Librarian Analytics dashboard. There's a very long path down here at the bottom of the slide to get to this, but if you're not familiar with this dashboard, it's a really, really great resource, which you should definitely be taking advantage of. There was an analytics focus group that was formed, it looks like in 2019, and they started by gathering reporting needs from the community. What types of things did the community need to be able to report on? And then they built out this really great dashboard based on all of those user stories. And it's broken down into different tabs based on the topic. So usage, for example, is one of the tabs. Working with citations is a tab. Working with reading lists is a tab. And then within each of those tabs, there's, I don't know how many it is, but many, many, many reports that make up this dashboard. So this is a really great place to go if you're ever looking to see if there's something kind of similar to what you're looking for, or even if you're just getting ideas. I talk to a lot of libraries who don't really even know what to report on with Leganto. Obviously, that's something we'll be talking about in this presentation, but I think this dashboard is also a really nice way to kind of look and see what other people are doing with analytics. There's also a dashboard in the community folder, which is called the Librarian Usage Dashboard. It's kind of meant to be an overview of the types of things that you could potentially report on from an analytics perspective. It's something that we use in demos, so you may have seen it depending on how long you've been using Leganto and if you remember your demo from before you were using it. But again, it's kind of the types of things that you could report on. So there's sample reports in here around main topics, instructor usage, student usage, sort of higher level sort of strategic information. So that's in there as well. There's also a folder about instructor usage with several different reports about that use the instructor usage subject area. So there are lots of resources available to you. My slides have screenshots, at least some of them do, of screenshots for reports, and I also have the information about where these reports are. So you'll be able to go into the community folder, hopefully, and find the right report. I will warn you, I saved a couple of them yesterday, so if you don't see them, you should see them next week. The community folder for analytics is updated on a weekly basis, so you'll see them next week if you don't see them today. Most of them were already in there. It was just maybe 2 more that I added last night. So anyway, you do have a lot of resources available. You shouldn't have to start from scratch with a lot of these things. And I will also say, please do share your reports with the community. If you have, great reports or great dashboards, that community folder is there for everybody. So, and it's a really great resource. So not only should you be looking at it to see what's there and to get ideas and to use these reports as a starting point, but also if you're doing something that's not already, part of that community folder, definitely feel free to add your reports into that folder. Okay, so now all of that is just the introduction into what we're going to be doing today, which is about what you can actually do with the Leganto data. Data is so important to every institution. I know when I worked in course reserves, I had lots of stories about what we were doing, the students who came in and said, I couldn't have passed my class without this book on your course reserve shelves, or this is so helpful. There was a lot of that kind of feedback from users, but more and more what the institution requires is numbers. What is the library doing? What is the impact of the library? Why does the library need such a big budget? That's really what it comes down to. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is how you can use your Leganto data to highlight what your institution is doing, and also do more to support teaching and learning. So I'm really thinking about this from those 2 different perspectives, ways that you can maximize the impact that your library can have in supporting teaching and learning. This is, of course, something that Leganto helps with anyway, by building that bridge between the library and teaching and learning. But as you now have this tool that can help you with that, of course, the reports are also going to be really important to help you kind of extend that, not only to understand what you're already doing, but extend that as well, to have a bigger impact or a more obvious impact as you're supporting course needs. So with this topic, I'm thinking about things like, how does the library collection align with teaching and learning needs or teaching and learning requirements, course requirements? How can the library support more instructors, courses, or students? How can instructors create more engaging resource lists? Again, really focused on scaling up in your library to do more or to make a more obvious impact here. The second sort of very, very broad topic is demonstrating that information externally, sharing this information with other departments, with your college or university leadership, with various library stakeholders, really making sure that the institution and everybody who needs to know knows how important the library is. And here, thinking about things like, what is the impact of the library collection? What is the impact of your services, your staff, the support that you provide? Being able to measure what the library is doing, and how does the library contribute to institutional goals? So for this, maybe student success, learning affordability, sort of higher level goals that the institution may have. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, is kind of using the data in analytics to help answer these types of questions that you may have. And my tip here, and I'll use this sort of throughout the presentation, is to reframe the question that you're asking, or maybe to think about the data in a more strategic way. So as an example, one of the measurements that's available in analytics is active students, which tells you how many unique students used Leganto. So that's one, that's what the data is. That's what a question could be. How many unique students used Leganto last year? But you can also think about this from a different perspective, looking at how many students you have total, what percentage of students used resource lists in their courses last year, or even, taking this sort of a slightly different perspective, what percentage of students used library resources in their courses? How many students are impacted by library resources in the classroom? So these questions sort of get to the more strategic angle here of what is the library impact? Why does it matter that the library is part of the institution? What difference does the library make to the institution? It's not just the number of students, which of course is great information, but when you're presenting this to your stakeholders outside the institution, the library, even within the library, thinking about it from this different perspective can be a lot more meaningful to people who maybe aren't as familiar with what Leganto is or what it does. What you're focusing on here is, again, that impact of the library. So that's kind of the idea behind this presentation, and will be the idea behind some of the examples that I am going to give. I'm going to talk about reports from the library workflow perspective. I'm actually going to spend a little bit less time on this one. I think most of the time when I talk to libraries, these are the types of reports that I get asked about. Tracking specific workflows, using analytics to find, things that have a certain tag because you need to do something with them, find certain types of citations because you need to do something with them. I think it's easier I get the impression anyway, that it's easier to identify your reporting needs when they're tied to your library workflows, because you know what you need as part of your workflows. I am going to sort of reframe this a little bit. Rather than library workflows, we'll be focusing on supporting access to course materials. Here's my example of myself reframing my message, reframing the way that we're talking about this. But I didn't want to totally remove this, because that is definitely a key part of what your library is doing. Is those workflows, those processing workflows, to help support access to course materials. So I have a couple of topics related to this that you can use analytics to supplement your library workflows to make it easier for you to provide access to course materials, streamline some of your processing work. A lot of the processing information that you need to do this work is in Alma, but I will highlight a few things that are really easier to do, or for some of these possible to do, in analytics. Identifying physical items on reading lists, identifying certain types of citations, such as citations that link to a specific source, and looking at other things that you may need to do. So here I have just a couple of sample reports. Again, you can see here I have the path to where you can find these reports. Physical items on reading lists. This is something that we've been getting asked about quite a bit over the last couple of years. I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that. Know that there are out-of-the-box reports available, or community reports available, that can help you find these resources. This is easier to do probably here than in Alma. There's ways to do it in Alma as well, but that's an example of how you can use analytics to kind of supplement the work that you're doing inside of Alma to process these lists. You can also, use this again to identify specific types of citations. For example, citations that are kind of pointing to a certain place. Maybe you migrated citations and they previously had files that were stored on a certain server. If you need to identify all of those files based on the URL, sometimes you can use this to identify certain strings in the link resolver. You can use the source field, and you can use analytics to look at your citations in bulk to identify certain types of things, where you can. What I'm really thinking about here is sort of getting on top of things that might be problematic. Obviously, things that point to a certain server that you don't use anymore is going to affect the student experience. So you can get on top of that work to provide a better support for teaching and learning, better support as students are accessing these course materials. Another nice example here from more of a processing perspective or a library workflows perspective, identifying items in the first 2 sections of reading lists which are not already complete. May not catch all of the sort of more urgent things that might be on a list, but if many of your reading lists are organized by sections, this can by weeks, this can be a great way to make sure that you're sort of on top of what students need most urgently. What this is really about, though, in the scope of this presentation, is not necessarily just about being able to do the processing work, but again, to be able to highlight what your library is doing to support teaching and learning. Some of that is processing, obviously quite a bit of that is processing, but the stakeholders in your institution, I'm thinking of the report that you are maybe presenting to the provost's office, probably doesn't care about what kind of processing your library does. So obviously you want to streamline that work so that you can then scale up to support more courses, provide seamless access for your students, these sort of general goals with Leganto, but also then be able to speak to that. What percentage of course materials are covered by the library collection? How many reading lists are complete, or maybe how many citations are ready to go on day 1 of courses? How many items did the library purchase for courses? Being able to speak to these types of questions can do a good job of demonstrating that work that the library is doing, but in a way that resonates with people who are outside the library and probably don't care about the nitty-gritty things that you're doing, to kind of bring it back to this higher level and show the value that the library can bring. Let me just peek at the chat here. Like I said, I would save time for questions at the end, but I'll sort of monitor it along the way also, just in case. I know sometimes it's easier to address questions in context, but I don't see anything there. So let's go on to the next kind of topic here for reporting purposes. I would say second to processing reports based on processing needs is the usage data. That's the second kind of key area that we get questions about. I'm actually going to back up, because I meant to say that a lot of those processing needs reports are actually part of the dashboard that the focus group created. A lot of the use cases that came in as part of that project were based on workflow needs, processing needs. The libraries need to identify certain types of citations or certain types of reading lists. So that's a good place to look if you're just sort of curious to see what else might be there, or what other institutions are doing from that perspective. There is also in that dashboard a tab for usage. So there's quite a lot of reports available from this angle as well. We think of this from the perspective of adoption and usage. How many instructors are using Leganto? How much are students using Leganto? But the other way to think about this, or to talk about this again, is from the perspective of the libraries, the impact that the library has on the institution. That's the language that resonates more with people outside, or people who may not understand exactly what Leganto is again that library impact. What is the library doing? Who is the library supporting? How is the library supporting? I don't know what to say, people, things. Let me go here, because I think this is probably a better way to describe it. But the reporting needs here are things like, how many active courses do you have? How many active lists do you have? How many active students are using Leganto? How many unique instructors are using Leganto? How many citations does the library support? These are the reports that you can build and the data that you can get. But again, thinking about this from a different perspective. So there's an example on the slide here, the number of students impacted. I already sort of talked about this as an example, but that's a question, I think, that resonates more with your stakeholders, that you can use to really highlight what the library is doing and demonstrate what the library provides. So again, an example of not only the data that you have, but ways to think about using that data to promote your library, to promote yourselves. and also working to expand that reach year over year. So you can see information about how the library support has grown year over year. What is the library doing now compared to a couple of years ago? Maybe you got a budget. I'm going to be optimistic for all of you. Maybe you got a budget increase. I don't mean to laugh, but I don't hear about that all that often these days. But maybe you're getting questions about why you can't cut your budget. You can show again what your library is doing, the results of of this budget and the staff that you have and what you can do. So you can show that kind of growth. You can also use this to identify opportunities for growth as well, to think about the reporting from that perspective. Again, how your library can work to have more of an impact in teaching and learning. So you can see the trends, understand those trends, and then use that to develop a plan moving forward. I know this is something that I'll just do a little plug here for campus engagement. This is something that they are really here to help you with, is expanding that reach for within your institution. You can use Leganto data to do more targeted outreach. You could report on which departments are using Leganto with this, which is definitely good to know, but I think sometimes more interesting is to see which departments are not using Leganto. Which departments are maybe would be good candidates for using library resources in their courses and aren't making heavy use of Leganto. You can really have make a shift in the impact that your library has when you can do identify areas of opportunity. So working with new departments, I always look at, this is our demo data here, and I always look at this and notice that we don't have any demo lists that are from our English department. I don't know if we even have a fake English department in our fake university, but you can look at that and perhaps see some maybe obvious new connections that you could start to build. From the same angle, you can also see the number of instructors within each department who are using Leganto. So again, another way that you could use this data to make a targeted plan for growth to, again, maximize the impact that your library has in supporting teaching and learning. All right, so the next area that we're going to look at here is the support that you provide. I just said this for teaching and learning. I just said it from kind of a different perspective. Here I'm thinking about using Leganto data to provide additional value to instructors who are working with Leganto, or maybe want to be working with Leganto, or will be working with Leganto. So a couple different ways to think about reporting from this perspective. The first one is the ability to report to a department, to a specific academic department, some of the trends that you may see. Individual instructors can see usage information, or know how much they're working, how many citations they have, for example. But at the department level, this also can be really interesting information to have. How many students, courses, lists, maybe citations are there for that specific academic department? How many instructors within that academic department? How does the usage, or how does this information compare to other academic departments? Maybe making it a little bit competitive here. What's sort of expected, or maybe what's the norm across the institution, and how does this department compare to that? Maybe, are your students as engaged as students in other departments, is a way to think about this from a more strategic perspective. Which resources are heavily used within this department? Maybe which ones are part of many different lists, or which ones are getting a lot of usage. So again, this is valuable information that you and that Leganto can provide that can help the department understand what's happening from sort of a higher level perspective. You can also potentially use your Leganto data to provide guidance to instructors or guidance to departments. You have the usage information across all of your reading lists. So you at the library are the only one who has the information about, what high usage reading lists look like or what high usage citations look like. Some of this I know is really dependent on the instructor and how they use these resources in the classroom, how they talk to students about the importance of these resources, and those sort of things that happen outside of Leganto. But inside of Leganto, you can see things like the order of the citations. If you have something first, is it more likely to be used? If it's first in a section, is it more likely to be used? Are the first 3 sections more likely to be used? These may be interesting. They may not be. You'll have to look at your data and see, but it may be interesting to look for those types of trends and be able to share that type of information with your instructors who obviously do care about whether students are, actually using these course materials. Does adding tags or public notes or due dates in Leganto generally result in more usage when you look at this information across reading lists? What is perhaps the average usage of resources that are tagged as essential compared to resources that are not? You could potentially look at that kind of information. Are certain more material types, do they generally get more usage than other material types? Are newer items used more frequently by students? So that's data that you have in Leganto. Again, you have to look, you may or may not find these types of trends, but in situations where you do, that can be really relevant information to share with your instructors, to help them build more engaging resource lists, to help them get students to actually work with these resources, to look at these resources. So you can from there make recommendations for ordering the content, for identifying items that might be candidates for replacement based on the material type, based on the date of the resource. I do acknowledge and recognize that there will always be differences in different subjects, different courses for some of these things, but you may be able to pull some general guidance or even scope this down to a specific department. Maybe you can say, in our sciences, we find that newer resources get X amount of usage, compared to resources that are 10 years old or more. I don't know. But those are the types of things that you might potentially be able to pull to help instructors. There are a couple of sample reports in the focus group dashboard that show the details of citations with high usage and reading lists with high usage. You can sort these reports. Of course, you can edit them if you need to have slightly different information, but all of this is data that's available within Leganto. The last kind of higher level topic that I want to talk about here is support for strategic priorities. This is an area where your library, can really frame your messaging in a way that aligns with the institution, what the institutional goals are, what the institution is, focusing on right now. What are the strategic priorities of your institution or your library as well? How is the library contributing? Is it something that Leganto could potentially help with? And can Leganto give you data to help your library with that process? So here I have just a couple of examples of ways to think about this. The first is cost savings. I know that exact language isn't relevant everywhere, but you can use usage information and potentially enrollment information or the number of students enrolled in a course combined with other information about the resources themselves, the cost of those resources, or even what the library paid for those resources, to help show how the library is contributing to this as a strategic priority, demonstrating how much the library collection potentially saves students. Because the library is providing these resources, we can save students potentially X amount of money per year, or this one course saves students, potentially, I say potentially because not all students would have purchased the materials, but this is data that you have. You know exactly how many students ended up using that resource as part of their course, and therefore didn't have to pay for it. If you are at an institution that doesn't, where learning affordability isn't a big priority, I should say, if you're in a region in the world where this is not a big priority or a big, I guess, problem today, you can also think about this from a different perspective. What's the impact of the library collections budget? You could maybe take a couple of examples. These are books that cost us X amount of money, and this is how many students were able to use this as part of their course. So again, you have this data already available. It's really a matter of kind of framing the information in a way that resonates with your various stakeholders at your institution or aligns with the strategic priorities of your institution. Another way to think about this, demonstrating to instructors the cost of their course materials, again, kind of from a learning affordability perspective, but promoting the need for more affordable resources, highlighting the library collection and the impact that using the library collection can have on students in their courses. So there's a lot that you can do with the Leganto data. Really the usage data here is what we're looking at, but there's a lot that you can do with that to show what your library is doing, show the impact of your collection, of maybe a learning affordability initiative that your library is supporting. Here I have just a very basic sample report that I want to point you to. This is something that's available in the community zone, looking at student savings based on usage and also potential student savings, which is based on the number of students enrolled in the course. Also, looking at Leganto data from a student success perspective, you may already be aware of this, but a couple years ago, we worked with Curtin University on a proof of concept here to see if Leganto usage data could help with student retention or student retention predicting students who would succeed or potentially drop out of the university. And so they exported usage data from Leganto and ultimately found that including this information made their student retention prediction models, the tool that is attempting to predict whether students will be successful or not, made those models 17% more accurate in identifying students at risk. The Leganto data certainly was not the most important. The most important, or the thing that had the biggest impact, was whether the student had failed a course in the past. But it did make it easier to, or did make it more accurate when predicting which students might be at risk. And therefore, the institution can focus those efforts on the right students. So we now have a specific focus group which is working on this, working on exporting usage data out of Leganto and loading it into third-party learning analytics platforms to better understand how Leganto usage information can help with institutional goals related to student success. This is obviously a very big factor for, I think it's safe to say, most or all institutions, that students stay enrolled. And so anything that the library can do to help show what you're doing to support that, you can do that today, looking at things like the usage information, students' engagement information, students are actually accessing their course materials. You have the information available, but we are also looking at ways to leverage this data as part of some of the things that may be happening at the institution outside of the library. So to sort of summarize, or maybe not summarize, but to think about what to do with this. So you have all of the data in Leganto. you have now some ideas for the types of reports that you may want to think about from a strategic perspective. So what to do with that? This is definitely a very key thing to do, is to share that information. Pull these reports, frame these messages in a way that resonates, and then share that story. Sharing it with other people within the library can really have an impact, making sure that everybody knows what the library is doing, how the library is supporting these strategic priorities. Also sharing with other departments, sharing with instructors, sharing so that everybody again understands the value, with institutional leaders, with other libraries. Think about all of the ways that you can really promote what your library is doing. Talk about the impact that your library is having. For all of these, use language that's appropriate for your audience and make sure it's framed in terms of what matters to them. It is likely different than the language that you might use in your library to talk about these things. And also think about different ways to share this message. Maybe you have it in your annual report already, but think about other opportunities to talk about what the library is doing, other places where you can do that outreach. So again, the goal here is that everybody that that interfaces with your library, understands that the library is important, and what you're doing is important, and that it helps the institution. And then just one more reminder here, as you're thinking about this, to think about strategic ways to reframe these questions, or to reframe the data that you're getting out of Leganto. So I just have a couple of examples here. Which departments have Leganto lists? You can change that to which departments are leveraging library resources in the classroom. How many courses does the library support year over year? What percentage of students use library resources in their courses last year? How many instructors leverage library resources in their courses, or utilize library resources in their courses? Again, you can just make some slight shifts in how you're presenting the data to align it with the whoever your audience is, and really have it resonate with them. We are starting to wrap up here. I'm going to do a quick demo here so I can point out some of these reports that I've been talking about. Before I do that, though, I do want to mention that if you're not aware, there is now a best practices and how-tos page for Leganto on the Knowledge Center. We're in the process right now of building out a page here which is specifically about what we're talking about today, analytics, but also ways that you can use that analytics. It'll have obviously this presentation and this deck, but also specific types of reports or guidelines for specific reports that you may want to pull. So with that, let me just peek at the chat here. I didn't see much coming in, so we'll have enough time to do a quick demo. I'm not really going to do much here, but I do want to point out, sorry. Sometimes I can talk and type at the same time, and sometimes I can't. So I do want to point out here a lot of the reports and the resources that I've been talking about to hopefully give you something that you could do, let's say today or in the near future, without a lot of extra training. I'm going to go into the analytics here, and all of the reports that I screenshotted or have screenshots of are in here. Most of the reports that I mentioned are also in here. Let me zoom this in a little bit. I'm going to go into the catalog here. I know some of you may be very familiar with this already, but just in case some of you are not, I'm in the shared folders, the community folders. Let me just kind of collapse some of this down. So in the community folder, there's a reports folder. In the reports folder, there's a shared reports folder. And then from here, this is the Leganto Librarian Analytics Dashboard Focus Group. And I'll actually open up the dashboard here so you can see what it looks like, and I'll do sort of a quick run through of some of these things. So you can see across the top, or maybe you can't, let me zoom it in a little bit more. You can see that the dashboard itself is broken down into these different topics. If we go into any of these topics, you can see all of the reports, and this is, I'm actually going to zoom out. So you don't need to be able to read the text, but I want you to get an idea of how extensive this dashboard is here. So there's several different reports per tab, and they all have a description that gives you an idea of what this is. And most of them also have a number of filters here. So the idea behind this dashboard is that it was something that any institution could use without having to have a lot of knowledge about how analytics works, or the ability to create custom reports or do significant changes. So the idea was that you could take this and filter this. So if you wanted to see, for example, which reports had the highest usage for a certain department, this is actually one of the ones that I had a screenshot of. You can just add the relevant filters here and then run the report. I'll do, and then here, this one has a number of different measurements for usage. So you'd be able to filter to the one that is, most relevant. If you're looking at citations, I tend to think that the students who viewed the full text is a really good measurement, the number of unique students who actually clicked through to that resource. You can also see students that viewed a citation, or the total number of views or the total number of click-throughs. So anyway, you have these different options. They're already part of this report, and then you'd be able to just filter them to get some of those, some of that data very easily. If you are not familiar with this specific dashboard or dashboards in general, I'll point out there's a return option here, which takes you down to, or takes you back to the previous page. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out here is that for all of these reports, you can edit them. So if you do need to make changes to it, this can be a really great place to start. If you already have a report that's similar to what you need, but maybe not exactly what you need, you can click on that, and then here is where you can do, I just clicked on the save as. So from here, I'd be able to save this. My institution is Alma University, so I could save it into my institutional folder. I could save it into my personal folder. So again, if you are going to make changes or customize these shared reports, just save a copy. So that's how you would do that process of starting with the shared report and then saving your own version of it to make changes. So that's the analytics focus group dashboard. I also want to point out, let me go back into the community reports folder, and I'll just move this around a little bit. The shared reports, and then the reports folder here is where there's all of the Alma shared reports. If you're using this for anything else, you're probably familiar with this, but there's a folder in here which is, here's the Librarian Analytics dashboard as well. So you don't have to go, oh, but different pages. Okay, so you don't have to go where I showed you, it's also here. But anyway, there's a Leganto course reading lists folder, and a lot of the ones that are in the slides that I showed today are in this folder. I'll zoom this back in again here. So here are the instructor usage ones, looking at the number of instructors per department that use Leganto, for example. This is that sample librarian dashboard that I said is designed to kind of give you an idea of the types of reports that you can get. So it has, I'll just open this one here. It has sort of status information about your courses or your reading lists, information about instructors, information about usage, some of these higher level reports about the impact of the library. You can see those in this dashboard as well. So that's in here. And then all of the reports that are part of this dashboard are listed below. So again, if you needed to use it as a starting point, you could do that from here. And then there's also, I'm just going to go back up, usage dashboard with P and E. This is something that UL created a little over a year ago in response to COVID and the need for institutions to identify overlap. Is that here? Nope, that's not here. I'm sorry, I'm pointing you to the wrong place. Ignore what I just said. I'll talk about that again. But anyway, there's other ones down here as well. So take a look at these reports. Some of these are the ones that I showed in the slides. the dashboard that UL created is actually in this analytics dashboard, or the reports that UL created here, Leganto P and E overlap. So this was in response to COVID and the need to identify citations with only physical inventory, only electronic inventory, or overlap of physical and electronic. I didn't talk about any of these, I don't think, but you may be curious to look at those as well. Okay, so that is pretty much what I wanted to share from a demo perspective. Again, I recognize that I just talked at you quite a bit. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to take a look at the chat one more time. I haven't seen anything coming in. Ray, is there anything that I missed?
Nope, we haven't had anything.
I'll give it just a minute in case you didn't get a chance to put your question in because I just kept on talking. I'll leave this slide up here, while we kind of wait for just a minute. This is my email address. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have trouble with any of these reports, if they seem like they're not quite what you expect them to be, if something seems like it's not, if you're having trouble pulling certain information, or if you just want to chat. I'm always happy to just hear, how things are going. I'd be curious to hear what I've missed as part of this presentation. If there are reports that you're using, I'd be curious to hear about that as well. So there is now one question that says, when will we receive the PowerPoint? So we'll share the slides and the recording with you by the end of the day tomorrow.
And I'll also just point out to everybody that a survey is going to pop up whenever you leave today's session, and we really value your feedback on these. We are planning on offering this series of webinars again next year. So any input you have on ways that we can improve it or make it any better, or subjects that we didn't cover, we really take that to heart. So please do take a minute to fill out the survey if you have the time.
With that, I'm not seeing anything else, so I think we'll wrap up a little bit early. I'm sure nobody will be sad to have a meeting that ends a little bit early.
Jessie, thank you so much for this presentation, and thank all of you for joining. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you at other webinars in the future.
Bye, everyone.
Oh, there was just one question about the possibility of watching previous webinars.
Oh.
Absolutely. We've got them posted on the best practices and how-to areas. I also will be creating a website or a page on the Knowledge Center where we're going to have all of this specific series of recordings all together in one place. So you can keep an eye out for that out on the best practices and workflows. Might be by Wednesday, or I mean, not Wednesday, by Friday of this week. So I keep an eye out for that there. And I'm glad you liked it. So thank you so much. All right, everybody, have a wonderful day.